Hi, DebConf. We're here to present the principles of digital autonomy.
I'm Molly de Blanc. You can find me on social media at mmillions on Twitter or at mdb at kit.kitchen on the Fediverse.
I'm Karen Sandler. You can find me. I have a weird handle. It's from olden days. It's lowercase o0 Karen 0o, and that's my Mastodon address.
Excellent.
So I'm Karen Sandler, and I've spoken at DebConf a couple of times before, so many of you may already know this, but I am really interested in software freedom, in part because I have a heart condition. It's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which literally means I have a big heart, and I'm totally fine. I generally don't have any symptoms, but I'm at a very high risk of suddenly dying. And so I have a pacemaker defibrillator that monitors my heart, and if I go into a dangerous rhythm, it shocks me to restore my health. The whole process of getting a defibrillator and living with it made me realize that our software may not be designed for us, and that it's critical for us to have control over it. So I was, for example, shocked inappropriately while pregnant, and very few women who are pregnant have defibrillators, so it just wasn't a use case that was particularly anticipated. So all this stuff made me super passionate about software freedom, and I would be remiss to acknowledge the fact that asking for the source code of my defibrillator was a big part of my journey, and not receiving it. And I can say now that it really does take a Karen to talk to the manager about the source code in her defibrillator.
And I'm Molly. I am a Debian developer. Know me from some of my greatest hits, like the Debian community team, and occasionally posting recipes on Planet Debian. I also work for the GNOME Foundation, though I am not here on their behalf. And I study bioethics at NYU, and I am not here on their behalf either.
I should have mentioned that I work for Software Freedom Conservancy, but things I say here are also my own views. Oh, and while I'm a lawyer, it will not surprise anyone to hear that this is not legal advice, and I'm not your lawyer, because why would you think that?
Aren't you Debian's lawyer?
I am sometimes, but not your lawyer.
Okay, no, you're not my lawyer.
You audience.
Okay, so we're here to talk about digital autonomy, and we're going to explain why it matters, as well as what it is.
Molly's looking at me with poignancy that says that I should talk about why does digital autonomy matter.
You have such a good story.
Well, and thank you, Mom. I started thinking about this kind of thing because I started thinking about when I needed a new defibrillator. I was all worried about the source code and worried about the safety and efficacy of these devices. And I smugly went into my doctor's office to get a new defibrillator, knowing that I was totally educated now because I'd gone through this whole process of asking for my source code and meeting all the people and knowing the security researchers and blah, blah, blah. And then when I got there, I found out that that none of the defibrillators that were available to me could have the radio telemetry switched off. So every single defibrillator that they had that they could offer me at the time just would be broadcasting remotely by default with very little security on it. And so I talked to the nurse, and we called all of the medical device manufacturers, and I was able to find only one device that had that you could disable the radio telemetry in software. So I got that device, even though it's inconvenient in a whole host of ways, and it means that I have to call the rep on his mobile when I have to go to the hospital in the middle of the night, if that ever happens, and he has to come from 45 minutes away because they don't have the right device to check my defibrillator at the hospitals. Anyway, I started thinking about this as like right not to broadcast. Like, it was so unsafe for me to be having something in my body broadcasting about my medical device all the time, that it seemed to me clear that what I needed was a right to not be doing that. And that there was the fact that this was not generally thought about and baked into the design of the devices that are available was just astounding and terrible and wrong. And as I started to try to develop this idea of the right not to broadcast, I realized that in fact it's something much more than that. It's not just the right not to broadcast, it's actually just the right to have control over yourself, your data, everything that is everything that is connected to you and your body and the internet and other people's computers, and it just goes on from there.
Yeah, I think a lot about, when I think about digital autonomy, that's a great story, because mine is this whole, like, I think about digital autonomy because I think about bodily autonomy, and I've thought about bodily autonomy a lot. And some of this comes from things like having studied bioethics in college, but some of it also comes from things just like having parents who taught me that I was allowed to have boundaries around, like, in the space around me, and I could say no to people, and I didn't have to hug people if I didn't want to. And I think of digital autonomy as very much an extension of that concept, that we have rights and not even privileges, they're rights, right? They're things that we just have. They're these things to which we're entitled because we're people, because we're alive. And that it does not just end at our physical self, and that it continues to exist in this space where we're online, where we're interacting with technology, where we have these experiences. So I think that talking about digital autonomy is important, especially with the prevalence of computing everywhere. So the principles of digital autonomy, that's what we're going to be talking about. It's a document Karen and I wrote, and it's a framework. So it's a way to think about technology. It's a way to think about tools. And when we say technology, we're using this really broad definition. One of the things Karen says is glasses are technology. I'm wearing contacts now because I didn't like the light on the screen glaring on my glasses. But I also have technology in my eyes.
We're laughing because I just moved my glasses from behind and did a really silly thing for people who aren't looking at the video stream.
Right, so we use this broad definition of technology. Mostly when we talk about it, we're talking about things that have computers in them and that run software. But we both think it's important to, like, acknowledge that technology exists in many places and in many forms. One of my kind of favorite examples is just sort of talking about traffic lights. Anyway, so the principles of digital autonomy is a framework. So it's a way to think about technology, and it's a way to analyze technology, and it's a way to think about your rights and your autonomy with response to those things.
I don't know how long it was ago that we were at DebConf and we gave a plenary of that's a free software issue, where we asked the audience to challenge us to come up with a topic that wasn't a free software issue. And the point is that technology is just incorporated into every part of our lives. And this is sort of a natural follow-up to that talk, where it was like everything's a free software issue or everything's an issue. So now what? Like, how do we think about that? How do we bring a framework to evaluate how these issues arise? And this is a draft that we have. We've written our principles of digital autonomy, but it's really a first draft. We've already gotten some great feedback, and we expect this to be a process where we figure out what the right principles of digital autonomy are by talking about it with all of you and revisiting what we think is the right thing, and then having a framework that we can move forward with in a way that's really productive.
So we'll be sharing the principles, but we also have a website that we'll share at the end, which has the full declaration on it. And I think when you look at that, it's really important to keep in mind that we wanted to write a short document, and it is still kind of long. So there are a lot of things that aren't in it that we figure will, or that we will do more writing on, we'll do speaking on, we'll do thinking and talking on. And hopefully maybe some of you will do that as well. So don't expect any single part of this to be complete. So principle one, the first principle is that technology should be in service to the people who use it. This is in some ways a bit of a catch-all, I think. And there's a lot to say here, sorry. It's a bit of a catch-all because a lot of things fall into the idea of service and also the people who use it. And in this case, when we're talking about people using something, we mean the end user, but we also mean everybody else along the way. And that includes the developers and the designers. It includes the person who's interacting with the technology, even if they're not doing so intentionally or knowingly.
And it includes, like this in this idea is also the right to repair, because if you can't repair it, then it's not in the service of, it's not in your service if you can't fix it when there's a problem. Not using, not needing to use it with an internet connection is the kind of thing that we would consider in this category. So in general, we try to keep the principles as very high level as we can to encompass the basic idea that we're trying to capture.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of put everybody on the same page, when we talk about this, like something being in service to the people using it, we mean that it works for them, it works for their interests, it works for their needs, and that it's adaptable for those cases. So that could be something like you're a blind user, so your technology needs to be able to meet the needs you have as a blind user. Or it could be something like you, I keep thinking about file format lock-in right now, and apparently that's actually that's something that people who talk about technology find really interesting, but people who use technology don't find interesting. So I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also covering things that are basic to all users too, like, freedom from surveillance, because then it's not in your service, or not just locking you into a file format, but also any particular vendor. It's like I should be able to work with whatever medical professionals I want for my defibrillator. I shouldn't have to only work with one company. Yeah. So informed consent. This is the second principle. There must be informed consent, and that means that people must be able to study and understand the technology. Software freedom goes a long way here, because if people can see the software that they are, if they can study it, then that means that they can understand what they're consenting to in a basic way. It has to be real consent. So for example, when I got my defibrillator, the choice is and I'm sorry to keep going back to my defibrillator. I'll stop. This is the last one. But
it's fine.
But the when I got my defibrillator, the choice is basically do you want this life-saving device or not? Just so you know, it's probably going to be broadcasting information. It's going to be collecting all kinds of intimate data from you. Is that, and there's no real choice because I need the defibrillator in order to live. And so it has to be real consent, meaning that there's you can decline it and still have an option.
Yep. So consent. So one of the phrases I really like to borrow from other people who talk about consent is the idea of enthusiastic consent. So it's not just saying yes because you have to, or saying yes because it's easy, but saying yes because you know what you're getting into and think it's great.
I'm sorry, it suddenly got extremely noisy where I am. Can you hear all of the sounds? Okay, I'm gonna just, I think we can still continue, and I'm just gonna switch to headphones, okay?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna go to the next slide.
So you go to the next slide, and I'll just jump in.
We also think technology should empower individual and collective action. Technology empowers individual and collective action. Yeah. So one of the things that I think people are very good at talking about is the rights of the individual, and the power of the individual, and that like you should have control over your computing. But also communities need to have control over their computing. And when we think about action, it's not just about one person doing what they need, but it's about helping each other out, and it's about doing things together.
Yeah, can you hear me? Is this is the sound
You're
better?
a little quiet, but I can hear you.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Actually, I'll just, yeah. Sorry everybody for having this real-time tech support, AV support.
Oh wow, no, that's great.
Good. So yes, basically being able to not only change the source code on for your critical software, but also being able to migrate data and ownership of that data is all parts of these this principle of empowering individual and collective digital action. So principle 4 is that the technology must protect privacy and other rights by design. That means that respecting users' basic privacy can't be like added on later. It can't be something that is an afterthought. It has to be considered in the fundamental design of the technology. Otherwise, we see all of the problems that we've seen in much of our technology.
We've talked about things that we generally consider to be digital rights, things like the right to privacy, the right to surveillance. We've talked about those kind of issues, and I would like us to talk more about the way technology fits into conversations about human rights, and things that we more traditionally considered to be rights outside of digital spaces. So there are some things that I think are easier to talk about, like the right to free speech. There are things like the right to assembly. And then there are some harder things that I think are still worth discussing. And I think that's a conversation to be had later and not right now because of time.
I totally agree with that. And I think our technology needs to be in the service of our fundamental rights.
Mm-hmm. I jumped slide. Anyway, so we're going to talk about Debian as a case study of these rights. It'll be fun.
Right, because we could write down all we want about what we think our principles are, but until you test them and apply them to something, you don't know whether they're really right or not. Are they the right principles? Are they in the right order? The best thing that, do they cover everything that we think is important? And how do they stack up? And so what better way than to look at Debian?
Yeah. As a quick disclaimer, we both like Debian. We're both
I love that that's
Debian
a disclaimer.
Well, so what I think is important is like it means that I think there are times when we're like maybe too nice to Debian, and there are times when like maybe we're too mean because we're looking for criticisms to have, so we have criticism. But also like we both know the project very well, and as a result of it, we're able, like when we've done analysis of things like Zoom, it's like, well, these are the documents that are available. But when we do an analysis of a thing like Debian, we're like, well, we know the process of having a GR, so we can talk about that.
That's right.
That's why I put the disclaimer.
And some of the analysis is critical to Debian. Some of it's quite favorable, of course, but some of it is critical. And even though we are obviously fans of Debian.
I'm using it right now.
Me too. What a surprise.
Okay. So reminder, principle 1 is technology being in service to the people who use it.
And so in a fundamental way, Debian has this one totally sewn up. Totally because Debian is made for Debian users by Debian users. Like it's by us for ourselves and for anyone else who wants to use it. And so because Debian is a project that is contributed to by so many people all around the world with so many different perspectives and needs, Debian gets a lot of this right just because of its very very fabric of being.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great, and like the flip side to this is that because Debian is made by Debian users for Debian users, you see some things sometimes that I refer to as crunchy, as in like they're kind of hard to get into or hard to understand, or like installing software with Debian is really easy, I think, because you just apt-get install the software package. But that means you have to not be afraid of opening a terminal and installing software in a terminal.
That's right. I think we may have a slide about building on Debian later, so I won't. Yeah.
Debian is highly customizable. I think that's really cool, and that fits in a lot also with points about having options, which we'll talk more about later. But the customizability means things like you can make it work for you. So you can use a different desktop environment if you don't want to use GNOME. I don't know why you wouldn't want to use GNOME, but if you don't want to, that's okay.
I couldn't agree more. For people who can't see the slides, or aren't looking at the slides are all fish themed. So they have like different kinds of tropical fish or other kinds of fish in very scenic water environments. And this is one of my favorites because it's a dolphin looking at the camera with this very, I don't know, like this smug smile of like benevolent. I don't know what it's a dolphin that would customize its software for its technology for itself.
Yeah, and you can make it work for you. That's the point, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. It runs on anything, so Debian, I would say, like to some extent, in ways that have caused frustration in some ways, from place to place. But it's part of this awesome principle that Debian should be able to run on as much hardware as possible, which is very enabling. It's very it allows for a serious democratization of technology. So many people use Debian to reinvigorate old equipment and install Debian on old computers that would otherwise not be able to run a modern system, and instead Debian basically makes that what would otherwise be trash into like awesome opportunities to bring computing to people who wouldn't otherwise have them. And I think this is a really huge thing for, is it in the service of people who use it? Like it actually brings so much power to people.
Yeah. Somebody earlier in DebConf, there was a talk about running Debian on a phone, which I think is really cool. So even this DebConf has had really clear examples of how much you can do with Debian. Next slide. Kind of the flip side to all of this is that finding help with Debian can be hard. The community is great. There's lots of documentation. One of the things I learned in putting together this talk is that the documentation isn't very well translated, though. Like Debian itself is really well translated. So if you're not a native English speaker, it can be difficult. If you don't know how to scan through the mailing list, it can be difficult. If you don't know how to use IRC, and the list goes on. So while we have all this potential in Debian, actualizing on that potential, having it be the case that you can take advantage of all the wonderful customization and options and like delight in it, like that's not accessible to everyone.
So the second principle is informed consent. You can't use the technology without informed consent. And I'm actually going to sneeze, so excuse me, I'm sorry. I tried to mute in time, but I failed. Go ahead, Molly. You read all the policies, and I'm going to just try to figure out how to mute.
I read a bunch of policies, both as part of my Debian new member process, but also as part of working on this talk. So I thought that they were very readable, and I like to add the caveat here. I've been doing this for a while. I'm a native English speaker. I'm well educated. Like there are a bunch of things in my favor to give me the benefit of being able to read policies, but I think these were still very readable and easy to understand. So good job.
And of course, the source code is available. So Debian's great in that front, and that we can have informed consent because we can read it. Also, the separation between free and non-free, and letting people know what it is that they're installing, and that they can make those choices for themselves, and that there's infrastructure around that, is really, I think that's a big portion of informed consent. The fact that that there's various alternatives, so it's not like Debian just chooses one kind of application. We don't have just one document viewer. We don't have just one video application. There's no single default. You can easily look at all of the choices, and often there are so many when you're just using, when you're just searching an app that you're like, which one should I use? And you have to do all this research. But so that's but the fact that there are choices and that you can install whichever package is the right one for you is also a big part of informed consent.
Like before, some of this, it can be hard to understand how it all works. And oh, right, that's what I meant. What I mean here, what I meant when I wrote the slide, was that how we said earlier, finding help can be hard, which is like Debian is huge, right? And there's lots of old code in it. There's lots of new code. Being able to have access to architecture explanations, like it's not just the information being available. It's like, is that information understandable? Has somebody processed it and turned it into something that like, I'm not going to say that anyone can understand, but something that like people who have some base level of like computer literacy can understand. Like can I, for example, process like what Debian is actually doing to my computer and how different parts are interacting? And I think that's one of the negative sides, to be clear.
Principle 3, empowering individual and collective digital action. Does Debian do that?
And I think this is interesting because we can talk about it from the perspective of the technology, but we can also talk about it from the perspective of building the technology and the community. And I think these are like both very valid ways to think about it, because part of the power of any given technology is the process by which it's built. So Debian is very comprehensive. it has many parts, and it has a lot of functionality. So as an individual or as a group, you can determine what your needs are, and chances are you can meet them with the Debian ecosystem. And that's actually really powerful, and that doesn't just enable, it empowers users to take action together or as individuals.
Right. Debian is emblematic of collective action, right? It's so many people coming together to create this exciting, impressive, impactful project, and we do it all together. So there's something really fundamental about this principle that's baked into Debian's DNA.
Something else is that Debian participates in community programs and outreach. And I think this is part of the idea of collective action, because it's bringing in new perspectives in development, especially with programs like Outreachy and Google Summer. I mean, Outreachy is like the big one here, I think, but I think Google Summer of Code also does this, where you're getting new perspectives on the project that in many cases don't already exist like as fully defined and fully developed. And I think that's like empowering communities. So it's not just that the technology itself is empowering communities, but the project and the this in chaotic mass is empowering action and empowering individuals as well.
Yeah, I would also put the mini DebConfs in this category as well, and local language events. I'm trying to remember, Molly, what we meant by pathways to be heard. So
this was you had some really good points here, and it was about how creating change in Debian is possible. And
yes,
getting in touch with like leadership is possible, which isn't always the case in corporate.
That's right. There's all kinds of social infrastructure around Debian, and so if you have a problem or a use case that you find that Debian doesn't address, there are ways that you can involve yourself to effectuate change and to be heard. There are multiple ways. There's the technical advisory committee, but there are all kinds of mailing lists and social structures all there. Which is, if you were using technology that was just promulgated by a single company, it would just be a black box. You'd be able to like contact customer service, and it's just definitely not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and since a lot of the Debian conversations happen in public also, you can see what the effects of your outreach are. I also think that, I had a thought here. Pathways to be heard, doing outreach, making requests of people. Oh, I'll remember later, I'm sure, when we're on a different slide and it's no longer relevant.
You can ask about it in the Q&A and see if Molly remembers by then.
Yeah, good check. So Debian can rise to meet your needs. And I think that's like a really big thing about empowering people. And that can be either through, now I remember my point, and it's relevant here too.
Oh, yay.
Great. Which is that, like, one of the really magical things about the Debian community is that people do stuff they don't want to do because it's good for the project or it's good for people using Debian. And I think that that this is like that's Debian rising to meet your needs, right? It's like things can and frequently will be developed because it's a thing that people need. And I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about the social contract soon, but I think that that's also, the social contract fits into this, which is the idea that like we're putting Debian users first.
This slide is a pufferfish that is all inflated and in a round ball, and it looks really happy, and it looks like it's rising to the top. So principle 4 is protecting citizens' privacy or people's privacy and other rights by design. Oh, so I'll let you talk about this, Molly, since you've recently read I think you revisited the policies for this, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. So as mentioned earlier, like the policies are readable and comprehensive. And this is in this case, I specifically mean the policies like the Debian privacy policy. Like it makes it very clear what you are being like, what things you're giving up, like what information is being gathered, what information is being shared, when it is the case, and like when you can opt in and when you can opt out of it. And that's like, that's cool. Like you can opt out of certain kinds of reporting. Like you can opt out of reporting like crashes in your system. Like that's great because it gives you more of an opportunity to like have control over what's being shared about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that because because there's process around a lot of this, because a lot of people are involved, and because we Debian folk are not shy about saying when we think something is not good or is inadequate or is bad, because we can have those dialogues. I think that goes a long way, and I think that all goes in with the idea of the DFSG and the social contract. That the idea about protecting people's rights, protecting our privacy, Debian is a principled project, and it is at the very foundations of the way that that Debian is created and developed, and how people can come into the project. So, actually, we may have another slide about this. I can't remember. But the focus on licensing, making sure that the software that we include and that we package is free and meets certain standards, and that our project meets those standards means that that we have a much better chance as a project than any kind of corporate endeavor.
Yeah. Let me go to the next slide, which talks about this. So everyone who's a Debian developer has gone through the new member process. And part of that is agreeing to uphold the social contract and like being tested on the Debian free software guidelines. So like members of the Debian project, whether they're official members in the sense that they're developers, or if they're other contributors or users, have a greater knowledge of what their responsibilities are to the software and to the people interacting with the software. And again, whether that interaction is direct or indirect, what kind of rights should be encompassed in this are, and what that looks like and feels like. So
I was amazed.
Tested on it. No, go.
I'm sorry. I was amazed when I took the test. I couldn't believe that this was the process. Like it was so good. It made you think about what is software freedom? Why does it matter? And then makes you think about all the edge cases. And every single person who's a DD has gone through that process and thought about those issues. That is so cool.
Don't have a lot of time left, so I'm not going to get into this because this involves me rambling a lot. But I have this nascent, growing, forming idea that something that's really cool about Debian is it holds the potential for justice, because it is something that everyone with tools and resources, like physical resources like internet connections or computers or things like that, has access to, because it's so transparent. It has this potential for people to be able to fulfill their with it. And I think that's not just about building equality in software, but building justice into technology. And that's all I'll say for right now.
And that is our analysis of Debian and our introduction to what we think are the principles of digital autonomy. So let us know what you think. Like, just get in touch. Again, you can read the principles, the first draft, on techautonomy.org, and you can email us at thoughts@techautonomy.org.
Yeah. So thanks, and we'll talk to you later.
Such a fantastic talk. Thanks a lot, Karen and Molly. Now, let's go to the questions. So the first one we have is, how do we convince people who can afford non-free hardware and software the importance of free hardware software in relation to digital autonomy and free society?
So what I like about this question is that it went in before the talk even started, which means that people are thinking interesting things. I think that, so first off, I want to start out by saying that like buying software that comes fully free to begin with is not cheap, actually. And so it's not just having, oh, well, I mean, afford is a broad term, so afford can mean a lot of different things here. So okay, what I want to say first, and then Karen, please interrupt me if I keep going on like this for a while, is I think that we need to think about these issues as extending beyond just free software and free hardware issues. And that digital, like, and that is part of the story of digital autonomy and not the entirety of it. And I think that, that being said, it's still important to talk about these things, but it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of free software and a lot of free hardware still fails on plenty of metrics, and can be doing better. That being said, there are a lot of resources and there's a lot of stuff we can say about adoption of software and adoption of hardware and getting people excited about those things.
Great. We have another question. Are public benefit companies like Peerism a step in the right direction towards digital autonomy for the everyday computer?
Yeah, I think that governance matters a lot, and the ways in which we have our technology developed and the corporate structures that we choose really do make a difference. Now, I admit I'm executive director of a software freedom charitable organization, so that is my perspective. But I think that there are different ways that you can implement that using different corporate structures, and being a public benefit company is a step in that direction. I think, to me, I would like to see a lot more of our technology developed in a true, like in a nonprofit model, in a charitable model, where folks have more of an opportunity to engage directly, and that I feel that way for hardware and software. I think we could be doing a lot more and embracing that idea of collective action and coming together and having our governance structures and our corporate structures reflecting the fact that the technology is being used by so many people for things that are so intimate in who they are and how they live their lives.
I'd like to add to that and say, I think what is important about B Corps is that we as a global economic entity have kind of shown that we can't really just always trust people to do the right thing, especially when money is involved in the conversation. So by having organizations and companies and nonprofits and B Corps and companies that build, like similarly to how we want to have rights be built right into technology from the start of the design phase, we want to have those same things built in, or I at least want to have those same things built into companies and organizations every step of the way.
Thanks a lot for your answers, girls. So now we have run out of time, and just a little announcement. We will have a pause of 1 hour, and we wait for you all for our last talk of this DebConf 20. So catch you later. Bye.